Have you ever seen that soft green moss growing across the top of your orchid pot? It's lush, it's green, it looks natural, and it almost looks like a mini tropical forest growing in your pot. But is it really helping your orchids, or is it just slowly suffocating them? Today we'll uncover the surprising truth about moss, how it can boost your root growth, and also how it can silently damage your plants if left unchecked. And by the end of this video, you'll learn exactly when moss is your orchid's best friend and when it just becomes a big warning sign. Here at the Nature Company, we demystify the science behind orchid growing so that you're not left frustrated and confused. In discussing the relationship between the moss and your orchid, let's have a look at the good first, before we get to the bad and the ugly. The good part is, one thing about the moss is it is showing you that your environment, the amount of humidity you have in the air around your plant, the amount of moisture your plant is getting, and even to a degree the temperatures that your plant are getting are going to be ideal for orchid growing. Moss is often found in the same areas where your orchids will be growing, whether it's in the trees or whether it's on the floor. Just about anywhere that you have orchids growing, you will often see moss growing. And that may make you think that there's a symbiotic relationship happening here, but it's not really a symbiotic relationship. It's more of a friendship, if you want to put it that way. They're not generally actually giving each other anything. What is actually the only thing that's happening is your moss is holding more moisture. So your moss allows for the area around your orchid not to dry out too quickly. So it's good in that moisture retention to keep moisture at the level of your orchid roots, which is going to be important so that your orchids don't dry out. So other than being a good modulator of the moisture content, because they'll help keep those moisture levels stable. In fact, they even help keep the temperature stable, as they have almost an insulating effect on the plant as well. So your plant's roots and the plant itself aren't affected so much by big changes in temperature all the time, which can be extremely helpful. But they're also a good indicator of when you may need to water your plant, because as soon as you see your moss starting to dry out, you know it's time to water your orchid again. So it gives you that regulator and indicator value. And not only that, it's going to help with the roots of your plant. There's special things in this moss that are going to help boost the rooting of your plant, but we'll get into that at the end. What are some of the problems that we'll end up getting with this moss? Well, for one, is going to be the most obvious, is withholding all that amount of water, not withholding, withholding that much water. You're obviously going to come into a problem at some point with rot, because you're now going to be holding so much moisture around the roots of your plant all the time that you may start affecting your plant and its growth. The roots may start to rot if there's too much moisture. Also, as that mat thickens up across the top of your pot, it may stop air movement moving into those roots. And without that aeration and with all that extra moisture, you're definitely going to land up with root rot in your pot, and your plants are going to start suffering. What some of them may even start to do is, if you start having too much moss in and around it, they'll start to grow out of the pot, so that the plant can then find more air and slightly drier environment for their roots to be able to grow in. And then you'll end up with the problem that you have the majority of your plant outside your pot and not in your pot, and that means you're going to have to repot sooner. And that's not the only reason that you may have to repot sooner, because with moss, it likes a slightly more acidic environment. So what it does is it acidifies with its roots the media that is below it. What that's going to cause is it's going to cause faster decomposition of your media. So that's also going to mean you're going to have to repot more frequently. And we all know what happens when that media decomposes. It starts to compact, it holds more moisture, it stops the air movement, and again, we get root rot. So these problems can start compounding quite quickly. Although you do get all those benefits, you've got to be aware of the negative sides too. There are some orchids, like your phragmipediums, that do like a slightly more acidic environment in their pots. So moss can actually be quite good for them, because not only do they like that slightly more acidic environment, they also like to have moisture around their roots, more so than what a Cattleya would. So they like to be moist all the time. So moss can be really beneficial for them up to a point also. With some of your other plants, again, as that media starts to acidify too far, you start blocking out some of the nutrients that they are then not able to absorb. And of course, then you get that sort of thing happening again. So it's a matter of understanding what orchids you have, what media you're growing them in, and how your plants are going to react. Because in a wide open media like this, especially when we've got all these air gaps in and around, a little bit of moss can only be beneficial for your plant. Because even if at some point it starts to really cover this pot, we still have all this air gap in around the base that's going to allow for air movement into the media itself. But we're still going to have to keep the moss in check. That does not mean we can allow it to grow to thick, voluminous layers that will then cause rot in and around the rhizome of the plant itself. So it's about managing how much moss. A thin layer of moss is always going to be beneficial to your plant. But as that starts to thicken up, it's going to stop the air movement, it's going to hold more and more water the thicker that volume gets, and then you're going to start getting the problems of lack of air movement, too much moisture, and root rot again. And again, with orchids such as your phragmipediums, when you've got moss growing around it, the moss will also help reduce some of that stress that your plants may have when you have only hard water to feed them, because the moss will help take up some of those excess salts and reduce the alkalinity of the water that you are feeding your plant. And these phragmipediums are particularly susceptible to high alkalinity. The high alkalinity will cause leaf tip burn, root burn, all sorts of problems, and having a little bit of moss is going to help keep the alkalinity level down to make sure your plant stays more on the acid side. Also, by the moss absorbing some of those excess nutrients, you're not going to get the same sort of salt buildups in your media, and that's also going to be beneficial to things like phragmipediums, who are also easily damaged by high salt buildups in their media. But understanding that the moss that's growing on your orchids is also going to be using some of that feed that you're feeding to your orchid does not mean that you must then go and up the feed volume of your orchids. Still keep your orchids fed at that weekly ratio. That's lower concentrations of feed more often, because we still don't want to overfeed our orchids. What is going to be important here is keeping the moss growth down to a manageable level. So constantly just peeling off bits of that moss to ensure that we're not getting those thick pads or it's spreading across the entire volume of the pot. And if you're mounting orchids, moss can be extremely beneficial, because not only is it going to help maintain the moisture in and around the roots of your orchid, it's also going to, as I said, help mediate that temperature difference that you get, that will keep your plant in a more stable environment that will make it easier for it to grow and flourish. And if you need to understand more about mounted and mounting orchids, remember to go check out that Buy Me a Coffee link in the description box below. Ed has posted up a lot of information there about a lot of different orchids that will help you in your decisions on mounting. And now for that holy grail of how moss can boost your root growth. Where it is going to be particularly beneficial is if you've taken a cutting or something, and especially if you've put it in a nice big open media to allow for that air movement and for that fast drainage of the water, this is where moss is going to be particularly helpful. Again, not only because it's going to help hold moisture around the roots of your plant, which perhaps you don't have any yet, and it's going to help keep the temperature stable, all which are going to be essential for helping the plant produce new roots. So it's going to keep moisture and keep your temperature stable, but also what happens with moss is it provides a wonderful environment for beneficial bacteria and fungi to grow. And these beneficial bacteria and fungi help keep the plant safe from any of those pathogenic fungi. So this is going to help your plant stay alive longer to give it time to root. And by providing it with that moisture, the humidity, and the stable temperatures, it's going to root a lot faster than if your plant is now struggling and under stress. In other words, the moss is going to be providing that perfect climate for all those mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria to keep your plant happy and healthy, and they can do all the work for you in encouraging your orchid to root more quickly and a lot stronger than it may have otherwise. So perhaps when you're doing fresh new transplants, perhaps it might be a good idea to add a little bit of that moss that's been growing on some of your other orchids onto the new ones, or don't remove all the moss that was possibly on your orchid as it was. Instead of washing all of that off completely, allow a little bit of it left so that it can then repopulate on top of the pot and keep your orchid happy. But of course, the main part comes into managing this moss. Don't let it overgrow. Keep control of it. Make sure you're constantly removing excess moss. Don't let it cover the entire surface of your pot, especially on a pot like this where there's no other ingress for air other than through the surface. With something like this, you may be more likely to get away with it, but also still understand having a large, thick layer of moss in and around the rhizome of your plant isn't going to be good either. Holding too much moisture there can cause stem rot, and that can be the demise of your entire plant. So please just manage your moss content if you're going to be growing your orchids with moss on them. And if you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.